Hey guys, tonight we slip quietly behind lace curtains and polished doors to uncover the secret lives of 1920s housewives no one was supposed to know. And before we begin, if you find yourself enjoying these late-night history journeys, feel free to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely like what I do here. I'd also love to know where in the world you're listening from and what time it is there right now. Because somewhere out there, someone is brushing their teeth while you're drifting into dreams. The scene around you forms softly, morning light through thin curtains, the faint smell of starch and soap, the creak of floorboards beneath careful steps. You stand inside a quiet home nearly a century ago, and although everything looks calm, you can already sense the rules humming beneath the silence. You probably won't survive this style domestic Olympics. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wake before the sun because she wakes before the sun, and you are her now. The room is cool, the kind of cool that makes you hesitate before leaving the blanket's warmth, but hesitation is a luxury she cannot afford. The first lesson arrives instantly. A 1920s housewife's day begins long before anyone notices she exists. You swing your feet onto the rug and feel wool fibers against your skin. The house is silent except for a distant ticking clock downstairs, steady and judgmental, like it's already disappointed in your productivity. You move quietly because the goal is invisibility. Not mysterious invisibility, more like furniture invisibility. If a chair creaks, someone notices. If you creak, that's a problem. Historians agree that domestic expectations in the early 20th century emphasized a wife's duty to maintain a peaceful home environment, which meant your success is measured by how little anyone realizes you're working. It's the original stealth mode. You dress in layers, beginning with stockings, then undergarments, then the day dress that will soon smell faintly of flour and soap, no matter how careful you are. The fabric brushes your wrists with a whispering sound, like it's reminding you that elegance is required even when scrubbing potatoes. Somewhere in a magazine illustration you've never seen, a smiling woman is probably holding a pie with suspiciously perfect posture. Downstairs, the kitchen waits. Coal stove, tin kettle, wooden table. You light the fire carefully, coaxing flame from embers, because matches cost money, and money is something you don't technically control. That's one of the quiet truths humming beneath the morning in many households of the 1920s. Husbands legally or socially controlled most finances, even if wives manage daily spending. You run the home, but the home is not yours. It's a bit like being CEO of a company where someone else owns the building, the desk, and possibly your chair. Water goes on to boil. Bread dough rests beneath cloth. Your hands already smell faintly of yeast. Outside, a delivery cart rattles past, wheels clicking on cobblestones. The world is waking, but you've been awake long enough to feel like you've lived half a day. On the wall hangs a handwritten schedule. Monday, wash. Tuesday, iron. Wednesday, mend. Thursday, market. Friday, bake. Saturday, clean. Sunday, church. The rhythm is so consistent it could be mistaken for a train timetable, and like trains, it rarely stops for personal emergencies such as I would like to sit down now. You step onto the back porch to shake crumbs from a cloth and the air bites your cheeks. Dawn stretches pale pink across the sky. For a moment, just a moment, you stand still. This is the secret space no one talks about, the sliver of morning that belongs only to you. No requests, no instructions, no eyes, just breath and birdsong. Historians still argue whether women of this era felt mostly pride or mostly pressure in their domestic roles, because diaries and letters reveal both. Some wrote lovingly about caring for families. Others hinted, delicately, that they sometimes wished the laundry would run away and join the circus. You return inside before the stillness becomes suspicious. Coffee must be ready at precisely the right time. Eggs must be cooked to preference. Toast must not burn. Breakfast is less a meal and more a timed performance with edible props. You move efficiently, each motion practiced until it looks effortless. The trick is to appear calm even when juggling 6 tasks and a hot skillet. A clock chimes, footsteps upstairs. The household is waking. You straighten slightly, smoothing your apron as though preparing for an audience. In a way, you are. The day's first judgment arrives in small glances. Is the table set? Is the coffee hot? Is the room tidy? Approval is rarely spoken aloud, but disapproval has a way of floating in the air like invisible smoke. One quirky detail historians uncovered from household guides of the time suggests that some manuals advised wives to apply a tiny dab of perfume behind the ears before serving breakfast, just in case their husbands leaned in for a morning kiss. Imagine seasoning your eggs while also seasoning yourself. Multitasking, but make it romantic. Chairs scrape. Voices murmur. The quiet kingdom of dawn dissolves into conversation and clinking cutlery. You step back slightly, hands folded, observing. This is another hidden rule. The meal is yours, but the moment is theirs. Outside, sunlight strengthens, slipping through window glass and laying golden rectangles across the floor. Dust motes drift in those beams like slow dancers. You notice them because you notice everything. Observation is your secret skill. You know which board squeaks, which cup chips, which neighbour walks past at exactly 9:15 each morning. You could probably solve mysteries if anyone thought to ask. Someone laughs at the table. Someone asks for more toast. Someone folds a newspaper. Life moves forward, ordinary and unquestioned, and yet beneath the ordinary, currents flow, expectations, traditions, silent negotiations. You feel them the way a swimmer feels undertow, invisible, steady, impossible to ignore once noticed. You clear plates, stack dishes, carry them to the sink. Water splashes softly as you wash, sleeves rolled, sunlight warming your forearms. Soap bubbles shimmer like tiny glass worlds. In their curved reflections, you glimpse a distorted version of the room, the table, yourself. It's peaceful, almost hypnotic. But the day has only begun. The fabric at your waist tightens as you lean forward to lift the wash basin, and that's when you notice it properly, the quiet, persistent pressure hugging your ribs like an overly affectionate octopus. Beneath the apron, beneath the dress, beneath even the polite illusion of comfort, the corset holds you in its firm, structured embrace. It does not ask whether you'd like to breathe deeply today. It has already decided. You straighten slowly, careful not to strain the laces. The garment shapes your posture into something upright and composed, which sounds elegant until you realize elegance is sometimes just discomfort with good manners. The sensation is constant, a gentle squeeze when you inhale, a firmer reminder when you bend, a subtle resistance when you twist. It's not exactly pain, it's more like being politely disagreed with by your own clothing. Corsets in the 1920s were actually beginning to decline in popularity compared to earlier decades, as looser fashions and new undergarments like girdles entered wardrobes. That's the mainstream historical truth. But in many homes, especially traditional or rural ones, women still wore structured foundation garments because posture, silhouette, and respectability were closely tied. You don't just wear the corset, you wear what it represents: discipline, propriety, and the unspoken promise that you will not slouch morally or physically. You reach for a stack of plates and feel the boning press lightly into your torso. There's a faint creak, almost like a ship's mast adjusting to wind. The sound is subtle, but to you it's as noticeable as a drum roll. You pause, listening, just in case someone else heard. They didn't. Of course, they didn't. The architecture of your outfit is your private engineering project. Historians still argue whether most women found corsets genuinely restrictive or simply normal, because personal accounts vary wildly. Some diaries describe relief when removing them at night, while others barely mention them at all, as if the sensation blended into daily life like background music. Perhaps comfort is relative. After all, if you've worn something since girlhood, you might assume ribs are supposed to feel gently supervised. You carry the plates to the cupboard, each step measured. Quick movements are risky. The corset prefers negotiation to spontaneity. Even reaching high requires strategy. Elbow first, then shoulder, then hand. It's less like stretching and more like solving a polite puzzle designed by a tailor with strong opinions. The kitchen smells faintly of starch, toast and metal, warmed by sunlight. You wipe the table, circling crumbs into your palm. The apron brushes your knees. Beneath everything, the corset remains steady, its pressure oddly reassuring now that you're aware of it. Like a strict chaperone, it insists you behave properly even when no one's watching. There's a peculiar comfort in structure. Clothing manuals from the early 20th century often described proper undergarments as supportive, which is a very diplomatic way of saying slightly bossy. One quirky tidbit from period advertisements reveals that some corset makers claimed their designs improved not only posture, but also character. Imagine fastening your laces each morning thinking, "Ah yes, time to become morally upright along with my spine." You bend to pick up a fallen spoon and feel the garment tighten. Not painfully, just firmly, like a handshake that lasts 1 second too long. You adjust your stance, adapting without thinking. That's the real secret. You learn to move with it, not against it. The body memorizes the rules until they feel like instinct. Outside, a breeze taps gently at the window. Curtains sway. You watch them for a moment, envying their freedom to billow without permission. If curtains wore corsets, you suspect they'd file a formal complaint with the wind. You cross the room again, this time carrying a basket of linens. The weight presses the corset slightly inward, reinforcing its presence. It's strange how something hidden can feel so influential. Anyone looking at you sees only a tidy dress and capable hands. No one sees the framework beneath, the unseen architecture shaping every motion. It's a reminder that appearances are often collaborative efforts between fabric and endurance. You pause near the mirror by the door. Your reflection stands straight, chin level, shoulders aligned. Composed. Respectable. Effortlessly poised if one ignores the engineering happening under the surface. You tilt your head, studying yourself. The silhouette is fashionable for the era. Smooth lines, controlled waist, neat profile. Society would approve. Society, you suspect, has never tried tying its own ribs into a decorative arrangement before breakfast. Another breath. The corset yields slightly, then resumes its gentle hold. You wonder, briefly, what it would feel like to spend an entire day without it. The thought is oddly thrilling, like imagining you've decided to attend dinner wearing roller skates. Not scandalous exactly, just adventurous. But you smooth your apron instead. Routine wins. It usually does. From the hallway comes the faint sound of footsteps passing the front door, someone out on morning errands, shoes tapping briskly along the pavement. The world beyond these walls moves freely, coats flapping, arms swinging, lungs expanding without negotiation. Inside, your movements remain measured, deliberate, graceful in that carefully engineered way. You return to the sink, rinsing the last dish. Water runs over your fingers, cool and clear. The sensation contrasts with the steady pressure around your middle, like a quiet conversation between freedom and form. Neither wins. They simply coexist. And as you hang the dishcloth to dry, posture perfect, breathing politely, you realize the corset isn't just clothing. It's a metaphor stitched into your morning, laced tight, hidden from view, shaping everything while pretending to be invisible. You notice the rules before anyone explains them to you. They drift through the air of the house like dust in sunlight, unwritten, unspoken, yet somehow impossible to ignore. You feel them as you fold the dishcloth, as you straighten the chairs, as you listen for footsteps in the hallway. No one hands you a list titled Marriage Instructions for Optimal Harmony, but you sense there must be one tucked invisibly into the walls. You move through the parlour, adjusting a cushion that is already straight. This is one of the silent laws. Perfection is not about fixing problems, it's about preventing anyone from noticing they could have existed. A wrinkle in fabric, a crumb on a table, a delay in supper. These are not disasters, but they are noted, and being noted is the first step toward being judged, which is the domestic equivalent of thunder rumbling far away. In the 1920s, marriage advice columns were wildly popular in newspapers and magazines, offering wives detailed guidance on how to maintain a happy household. That's the well-documented historical fact. They advise things like speaking gently, keeping the home tidy, and ensuring a husband's comfort after work. Some columns even suggested wives greet their husbands with a smile, no matter their own mood, which is impressive considering moods tend to behave like cats and refuse to be summoned on command. You walk past the clock again. Tick. 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 It sounds louder now, as though it's timing not minutes but expectations. You imagine each tick as a reminder. Be pleasant. Be efficient. Be agreeable. Be invisible when necessary, noticeable when useful. It's a delicate balance, rather like trying to be both a painting and the wall it hangs on. Historians still argue whether most couples actually followed these strict behavioural ideals, or if advice columns simply reflected cultural aspirations rather than reality. After all, people have always been wonderfully inconsistent at following instructions, especially instructions about emotions. Still, the presence of such guidance suggests that many believed harmony could be engineered if wives just adjusted themselves carefully enough. You stop at the window and glance outside. Across the street, a neighbour sweeps her steps with brisk strokes, her movements quick but contained. You both exchange the smallest nod. No words, just acknowledgement. That nod carries its own silent rule. We see each other, we understand, and we will never discuss it aloud. Back inside, you check the mantel. A photograph sits there, formal pose, careful smiles. You remember the day it was taken, the photographer instructing everyone to hold still, to look serene, to present the correct version of themselves. Marriage, you suspect, sometimes feels like living inside that photograph long after the flash fades. Another rule reveals itself when you hear a chair scrape in the next room. Conversation shifts. You instinctively adjust your expression, smoothing your features into pleasant attentiveness. Not fake, just curated. The way one tidies a room before guests arrive. Emotional housekeeping, you might call it. And you're very good at it. A curious tidbit from an early 20th century etiquette booklet suggests wives should avoid contradicting their husbands in front of others, recommending instead that disagreements be mentioned later in a gentle tone. The phrase gentle tone appears repeatedly, as if volume alone could determine marital peace. You imagine someone measuring it with a ruler. Ah yes, today's disagreement is precisely 3 inches too loud. You step lightly across the rug, each movement practiced enough to seem natural. The trick to these silent rules is that they rarely feel forced. They feel expected, like gravity. You don't wake each morning deciding to obey gravity, you simply don't float away. Social expectations work much the same way. Invisible, constant, unquestioned, until someone points them out. In the kitchen doorway, you pause. There's a faint smell of soap and starch lingering from earlier chores. It's a clean scent, respectable and crisp. Respectability itself is one of the biggest unwritten rules. Reputation travels faster than telegrams in a neighbourhood like this. A raised voice, an unkempt yard, an unanswered greeting, Any of these can ripple outward into whispers. And whispers, once released, are very difficult to fold back up. You smooth your skirt again, though it doesn't need smoothing. The gesture is calming. Ritual often is. Anthropologists sometimes note that repetitive tasks reduce anxiety because they create a sense of control. You may not control society's expectations, but you can control how neatly that hemline falls. Victory, however small, is still victory. Footsteps approach. A voice calls your name from another room. Instantly you're alert, not startled, just prepared. Preparedness is another rule, though no one calls it that. Be ready to answer. Be ready to help. Be ready to listen. Readiness is the background music of your day. You step toward the sound, posture straight, expression warm. Inside, your thoughts remain your own, drifting like clouds no one else can see. That's the quiet loophole in all these silent laws. They govern what you do, not what you imagine. And imagination, you realize, is gloriously difficult to supervise. You enter the room. Light spills across the floorboards. The conversation resumes. The day continues, and the rules, those invisible, persistent companions, walk beside you, perfectly silent, perfectly present. You tie the apron strings a little tighter and step back into the kitchen, where the real laboratory of the household waits, though no one calls it a laboratory, except perhaps you. Sunlight pours across the table, illuminating bowls, jars, spoons, and folded cloths arranged with quiet precision. It looks simple at first glance. That's the illusion. Kitchens in this era are theatres of chemistry disguised as rooms for soup. You rest your hands on the wooden surface and take in the layout the way a scientist might examine instruments before an experiment. Flour tin at the left. Sugar jar sealed tight against ants. Measuring cup with faint etched lines. Each object has its place, and you know those places the way sailors know constellations. There's comfort in that certainty. If someone blindfolded you and spun you around twice, you could probably still find the cinnamon by scent alone. Cooking in the 1920s is not casual guesswork, it's applied knowledge passed down through generations, cookbooks and experience. That's the widely recognized historical truth. Precise measurements matter, especially because ingredients behave differently depending on temperature, humidity, and freshness. Baking bread, for instance, requires understanding yeast like it's a moody house guest. Too cold, it sulks. Too hot, it panics. Just right, it performs miracles. You pour flour into a bowl. The soft hiss as it lands sounds almost like whispering. A faint cloud rises, dusting your fingertips. The texture is cool and silky, slipping through your skin's lines as if it belongs there. You add salt, sugar, and yeast, stirring slowly. This is chemistry, though no one hands you a diploma for it. You measure by sight, by smell, by the subtle shift in resistance as your spoon moves through the mixture. It's muscle memory and intuition working together like dance partners. Historians still argue whether society at the time fully recognized domestic labor as skilled work or simply assumed it was natural for women, which is a polite way of saying unpaid expertise often went unnoticed. You suspect the flour would laugh if it could hear that debate. Flour knows how much skill it demands. Flour is not easily impressed. You fetch warm water from the kettle and pour carefully. Too fast and the mixture clumps. Too slow and the yeast might hesitate. The smell begins to change. First plain, then faintly sweet, then alive. That transformation always feels slightly magical, like watching a quiet room suddenly fill with music. Outside, a cart rattles past again. The sound fades. Inside, you stir. One quirky tidbit from an early 20th century home economics guide recommends that wives memorize ingredient prices so they could adjust recipes depending on market fluctuations. In other words, you're not just cooking, you're budgeting, forecasting, and performing edible economics. Somewhere in the modern world, a business school professor would call this resource optimization. Here, it's just Tuesday. You knead the dough. Press, fold, turn. Press, fold, turn. The rhythm settles into your wrists and shoulders. The motion is repetitive but oddly soothing, like rocking gently in a chair. Your corset presses back each time you lean forward. There's that familiar firmness again, the quiet reminder from Section 2's ever-present companion. It doesn't stop you. It simply insists on participation. The dough gradually softens, becoming elastic beneath your palms. You can feel the gluten forming, though you wouldn't call it that out loud. You'd just say, it's ready. Knowledge doesn't always need scientific vocabulary to be precise. Your hands know when the texture shifts from sticky to supple. They've learned through years of practice, trial, and the occasional loaf that emerged from the oven resembling a very determined brick. You pause to brush flour from your fingers. It drifts to the floor in pale streaks. Cleanliness matters, of course. Another unspoken expectation. A tidy kitchen reflects a capable wife. A messy one suggests, well, people don't say it directly, but their eyebrows might. You glance at the recipe card propped nearby. The handwriting is neat, slanted slightly right. Measurements sit beside tiny notes. If humid, add more flour. If cold, wait longer. These are observations, experiments, conclusions. You realize you're looking at data collected over years, a personal scientific record disguised as dinner instructions. The oven door creaks as you open it to check the coals. Heat breathes out, warming your face. You adjust the embers with a poker, nudging them like a conductor guiding musicians. Temperature control is crucial. Too hot, and bread burns outside before cooking inside. Too cool, and it sulks into doughy disappointment. You judge by colour, by feel, by instinct. Thermometers exist, of course, but intuition is faster. From the hallway comes the faint tick of the clock again. Timekeeping is part of your experiment. You don't measure in minutes so much as in stages: first rise, second rise, bake. The rhythm of cooking merges with the rhythm of the day, each reinforcing the other. You set the dough aside beneath a cloth. Now comes waiting, the quiet phase of transformation. Yeast works invisibly, turning simple ingredients into something airy and alive. You watch the covered bowl as though you might catch it in the act. You never do. The magic happens when no one is looking, which feels like a metaphor trying very hard to be noticed. You wipe the table, align the utensils, and take a slow breath. The kitchen smells warm, faintly sweet, slightly smoky from the stove. It's a scent that says work is happening even when nothing appears to move. And standing there, surrounded by bowls and spoons and sunlight, you realize the secret truth humming beneath every ordinary meal. This room isn't just where food is made. It's where knowledge lives quietly, disguised as routine, waiting for someone perceptive enough to see it. You lift the corner of the cloth, covering the dough just enough to peek, then lower it again as if you've glimpsed something private. The kitchen is quiet now, the kind of quiet that invites wandering thoughts. Your gaze drifts to the small stack of recipe books near the shelf, modest little volumes with worn spines and softened corners, their pages slightly curled from years of steam and flour-dusted fingers. At first glance they look ordinary, practical, innocent even. But you've learned better. You pick one up. The cover creaks faintly as you open it, releasing a smell like paper and vanilla and time itself. Inside, neat rows of handwritten recipes fill the pages: cakes, soups, preserves, biscuits. Measurements sit carefully beside instructions. But between those lines, in the margins and corners, something else lives. Notes. Tiny ones. Some written lightly, almost shy. Others darker, pressed harder into the paper as if emotion travelled through the pencil. This is the hidden archive no visitor ever notices. Recipe books in the early 20th century often doubled as household journals, though not officially. That's the accepted historical understanding. Paper was valuable, and a bound book already lived safely in the kitchen, so many women used spare spaces to record reminders, thoughts, or moments they couldn't easily say aloud. It's practical secrecy. Camouflage made of cinnamon stains. You turn a page, add more sugar if he seems tired today. The note is small, tucked beside a pie recipe. You pause. It isn't really about sugar, is it? It's about moods, atmospheres, adjustments. The quiet art of emotional weather prediction. You imagine the moment it was written, pencil hovering, thought forming, decision made to write it down where no one would question it. Another page, best made when the house is calm. That one sits beside instructions for bread. It could refer to temperature, or timing, or noise, or everything at once. Historians still argue whether these margin notes were purely practical or subtly expressive, because interpretation depends on tone, and tone is notoriously difficult to preserve in graphite. You flip further. The paper rustles softly, a delicate whisper. A pressed flower falls out, brittle and pale. You catch it before it touches the table. For a second you just hold it, surprised. It's not labelled, no explanation, just a flower flattened between years, a memory with no caption. You slide it back gently and continue reading. One quirky detail scholars have noticed is that some surviving recipe books from the 1910s and 1920s contain coded markings, small symbols or underlines that don't correspond to ingredients at all. In a few cases, historians suspect these marks signalled private meanings understood only by the writer. A star beside a soup recipe might mark a special occasion. A dash beside a cake might recall a particular afternoon. It's a quiet system of symbolism, like a secret language written in flour and ink. You find one such mark now, a tiny triangle drawn beside a pudding recipe. Nothing explains it. No key, no legend, just the symbol. You tilt the page, wondering. Celebration? Warning? Memory? The mystery hums softly, patient as a cat waiting to be noticed. From the other room comes the faint creak of a chair. You freeze instinctively, listening. Silence returns. You exhale. Even alone, you guard these pages like they might blush if seen. You trace a line of handwriting with your fingertip. The pencil grooves are shallow but steady. You notice how the letters lean slightly forward, as though eager to reach the next word. Handwriting reveals moods the way voices do. Calm script. Hurried script. Careful script. Each line preserves a tiny fragment of a moment long gone. Another margin note catches your eye. Remember this for rainy days. That's all it says. No explanation. No date. Just the instruction. You smile faintly. It feels less like a cooking tip and more like advice from one quiet afternoon to another across time. Perhaps the recipe comforted her once. Perhaps she hoped it would again. Perhaps she simply liked the idea that future her would understand. You close the book halfway, thumb still marking the page. The kitchen clock ticks softly behind you. Outside, a bird chirps. The world continues, unaware of the tiny archive resting in your hands. These books hold more than meals. They hold moods, strategies, hopes, adjustments, memories. They hold evidence of a mind at work beneath routine. Anyone glancing at them sees instructions for soup. Only someone patient enough to read the margins sees the life between the lines. You run your hand over the cover before setting it back on the stack. The worn surface feels smooth, almost warm, as if it remembers every time it's been opened. You place it carefully on top, aligning the corners. And as you turn away, you realize the true recipe hidden in those pages was never written in the ingredient list at all. It was written quietly, in pencil, along the edges where secrets prefer to live. You notice the folded paper tucked beneath the recipe books, only because the edge peeks out at an angle too deliberate to be accidental. It's small, creased twice, the kind of fold meant for slipping into an envelope, or into a pocket, or into a drawer where it can wait quietly for courage. You slide it free with careful fingers, the paper whispering as it moves, like it knows it's being overheard. The kitchen feels suddenly more private, as though the walls themselves lean in. You unfold the sheet. The handwriting matches the recipe notes, same gentle slant, same steady pressure, but this time there are no measurements, no ingredients, no oven temperatures. Just sentences. Lines of thought, words that seem to stretch their legs after being kept still too long. Letters like this were surprisingly common in personal archives from the early 20th century. That's the established historical fact. Many women wrote reflections, confessions, or opinions they never intended to send, using paper as a safe listener when conversation wasn't an option. Historians sometimes call them unsent letters, though in truth they're more like conversations paused before they begin. You read the first line. I don't think I could say this aloud. Your eyes linger there. The sentence hums softly, like a note from a piano struck once and left to fade. There's no name at the top, no date, no greeting. Whoever wrote it wasn't addressing anyone in particular, or perhaps she was addressing everyone at once. The paper smells faintly of flour and something older, ink, maybe, or simply time. You shift your weight, aware of the floorboard beneath your heel. It creaks gently, a reminder that even stillness has sound. You glance toward the doorway, half expecting footsteps. None come. You continue reading. The lines wander from small observations to larger thoughts. A remark about a rainy afternoon, a question about whether routine changes a person or reveals them, a brief note about wishing for more hours in the day. Nothing dramatic, no grand declarations, just quiet honesty, written in a tone too candid for conversation. Historians still argue whether these unsent writings were meant as emotional release or as rehearsal for real discussions that never happened. The distinction matters, because one suggests private comfort while the other suggests postponed courage. The truth, like most truths involving human feelings, probably wanders somewhere between. You tilt the paper toward the light, the graphite glints faintly along each stroke. You can almost imagine the writer pausing between sentences, listening to the scratch of pencil against paper the way someone listens to rain against glass. Writing slows time. It lets thoughts stretch out instead of bumping into each other. A faint smile touches your lips when you reach a line near the middle. If thoughts were dishes, I would have quite a stack waiting to be washed. You glance instinctively at the sink, where a single cup rests upside down to dry. The comparison feels oddly accurate. Thoughts do pile up. Some are easy to clean, others cling stubbornly, requiring patience and warm water and perhaps a little extra soap. One curious tidbit scholars have found in preserved personal papers is that some unsent letters were deliberately folded and refolded many times, even when never mailed. Researchers think the physical act of folding may have helped writers feel they'd finished expressing something. A ritual of closure, performed quietly. You look at the creases in this page, soft, worn, familiar. It's been folded often. Opened. Read again, perhaps on evenings when the house was quiet and the clock ticked just as it does now. You reach the last line. That is enough truth for today. No signature follows, just blank space. The absence feels intentional, like a door gently closed rather than slammed. You hold the letter in both hands, listening to the silence around you. It's not an empty silence. It's the kind filled with small sounds, a distant cartwheel outside, the faint shifting of settling wood, a slow, steady ticking from the hall. Each sound feels louder now, as though the act of reading has sharpened your hearing. You fold the paper along its original creases. The motion is careful, respectful. Fold once. Fold again. The page returns to its compact shape, secrets tucked neatly inside. You slide it back beneath the recipe books exactly where it was, aligning the edge so it peeks out just slightly, just enough for someone observant to find it again, because that's the strange beauty of unsent letters. They're hidden, but not entirely. They exist in that delicate space between secrecy and discovery, waiting for a moment when someone, somewhere, might understand them without a single word being spoken aloud. You rest your palm briefly on the stack, as though sealing the memory back inside. The kitchen smells faintly of rising dough now, warm and alive. Life continues. Tasks wait. The ordinary world resumes its gentle rhythm, and yet you carry the echo of that sentence with you as you turn away. I don't think I could say this aloud. Some truths, you realize, were never meant for voices, only for pages. You sense the eyes before you see them. It happens as you step onto the front path with the small basket hooked over your arm, its woven handle pressing lightly into your glove. The air outside is crisp, touched with the faint scent of coal smoke and damp earth. Somewhere a screen door snaps shut. Somewhere a dog barks once decisively, like it has a strict schedule. And somewhere, though you can't yet pinpoint where, you feel it, observation. Not hostile, not obvious, just present. You walk down the path anyway, posture straight, steps measured. Gravel crunches beneath your shoes with polite little clicks. The sound feels louder outdoors, as if every pebble wants to announce your itinerary. The basket sways gently. You adjust your grip, suddenly aware of how you hold your shoulders, how your skirt falls, how your hat sits. It's remarkable how quickly self-awareness arrives once you suspect you're being watched. Neighborhood culture in the 1920s, especially in towns and tight city blocks, often functioned as an informal social monitoring system. That's the well-documented historical reality. Without television or constant travel, people spent more time observing their surroundings and one another. Communities valued reputation, and reputation depended heavily on visible behavior. In other words, sidewalks doubled as stages. You pass the front gate and turn toward the street. Across the road, curtains shift slightly in an upstairs window. Just a fraction, barely noticeable unless you're already looking. You pretend not to notice. This is part of the choreography. Observers observe, observed individuals politely ignore. Historians still argue whether this constant visibility fostered stronger community bonds or simply increased social pressure, because records show evidence of both. Some people described neighborhoods as supportive networks. Others hinted they felt like goldfish in a decorative bowl. You continue walking. Mrs. Dalrymple, though of course you never call her that aloud unless speaking directly to her, stands sweeping her front steps with brisk, determined strokes. The broom bristles scrape in steady rhythm. She glances up as you approach. Her expression is pleasant, but her eyes are attentive in that precise way that suggests she could recall your entire outfit later if asked. "Morning," she says. "Morning," you reply, voice light, friendly, perfectly calibrated. Not too cheerful, not too subdued. Social tone is a delicate seasoning. Too much, and it overwhelms. Too little, and people suspect you've forgotten the recipe. You pass, feeling her gaze linger politely until you're several steps beyond. The sensation is oddly physical, like sunlight warming the back of your neck. It fades only when distance intervenes. A carriage rolls by at the far end of the street, wheels rattling softly. Two boys chase each other along the sidewalk, their laughter bouncing off the brick walls. A man tips his hat as he passes you. You nod in return. Every interaction is brief, civil, correct. Each one also adds another tiny entry to the invisible ledger of public opinion. One quirky detail sociologists have noted from early 20th century community records is that some neighborhoods kept unofficial mental tallies of residents' habits, who rose early, who entertained guests, who neglected their yard. No written list existed, of course, but collective memory can be surprisingly precise when fueled by curiosity and spare time. It's like a living newspaper with no printing press. You slow near the corner, adjusting the basket again. Inside, jars clink softly together. The sound is delicate, almost musical. You glance at a shop window as you pass, catching your reflection briefly in the glass. Hat straight. Collar neat. Expression calm. Presentation matters. Presentation always matters. A woman across the street pauses mid-conversation to glance your way, just a flick of the eyes. Then she resumes speaking. The moment is so quick it could be imagined, but you know better. Observation here is an art form practiced with subtlety. No staring, no obvious scrutiny, only quick assessments filed away like index cards. You reach the grocer's storefront. The bell above the door jingles as someone exits, the sound bright and cheerful. For a second you linger outside, hand resting on the handle. Through the window you can see shelves lined with tins and sacks, the shopkeeper arranging items with careful precision. Inside is commerce. Outside is commentary. You push the door open. The bell rings again, announcing your arrival to everyone within. Heads turn, not sharply, just enough. A greeting follows. Another nod. Another smile. You return them with practiced ease. The air smells of coffee beans, burlap, and faint citrus from a crate of oranges near the counter. It's comforting, familiar, and faintly theatrical all at once. You select your items thoughtfully, aware of how choices can be interpreted. Too many luxuries might suggest extravagance. Too few might suggest hardship. Balance, once again, is key. Even groceries participate in the performance. At the counter, coins change hands. The shopkeeper thanks you. You thank him. Politeness overlaps like lace patterns. Transaction complete. When you step back outside, sunlight greets you, warm against your cheek. The street looks the same as before, quiet, ordinary, harmless. Yet now you feel the invisible network humming around you again, threads of awareness stretching from porch to window to sidewalk. You walk home at an even pace, basket steady, posture poised. The watching doesn't bother you exactly. It's simply part of the atmosphere, like humidity or wind. Constant, unseen, influential. And as you reach your gate and step inside, you realize something curious. In a neighborhood like this, privacy isn't the absence of eyes. It's the art of knowing how to move gracefully while they're there. You feel the weight of the coins long after they've left your hand. It lingers not in your purse, but in your thoughts, like the echo of a bell that's already stopped ringing. As you step back inside the house and close the door behind you, the latch clicks with a small, decisive sound. Outside, the street continues its quiet observations. Inside, the air holds the faint scent of bread rising and polished wood. You set the basket on the table, remove your gloves, and smooth your fingers together slowly, as if the memory of money might still be clinging there. Because money, you're beginning to understand, is not just currency, it's permission. In many households of the 1920s, husbands controlled the primary income, while wives managed household spending through allowances or agreed budgets. That's the widely accepted historical fact. Even when women handled daily purchases, the larger financial decisions often remained outside their authority. You run the home, calculate the groceries, stretch the meals and balance the needs, but the purse strings are tied somewhere else. You untie your bonnet ribbons and hang it neatly on its hook. The motion is careful, deliberate. Small gestures feel more important when you know your influence has boundaries. You open the basket and lift out a paper-wrapped parcel, placing it beside the stove. The paper crackles softly, a sound like dry leaves. You flatten it instinctively, saving the sheet for future use. Waste nothing. That's another quiet rule. Part practicality, part necessity. Historians still argue whether women of this era felt financially powerless or simply accustomed to a different definition of partnership, since letters and memoirs reveal both frustration and acceptance depending on the household. Some wives described managing money as a skill they took pride in. Others hinted at the tension of needing permission for purchases beyond daily necessities. The truth, as usual, doesn't sit still long enough to be pinned down. You open a small tin on the shelf. Inside lie coins set aside for household expenses, each one placed carefully like a tiny metal promise. You count them without thinking, fingertips brushing their cool surfaces. Counting is soothing. Numbers behave themselves. They don't change moods or expectations. Three coins. 4. 5. Enough for flour next week. Enough for sugar if prices don't rise again. One peculiar tidbit from domestic guides of the time suggests that some wives kept secret emergency funds tucked into sewing kits or tucked behind loose bricks, not necessarily out of deception, but out of prudence. Scholars sometimes call this pin money, though the phrase hardly captures the ingenuity involved. You glance toward your sewing basket in the corner. It sits quietly, innocent as a sleeping cat. Whether it holds thread alone, well, some mysteries prefer not to be inspected too closely. You close the tin with a soft click. The sound feels final, though nothing is finished. Finances, like tides, always return. You slide the tin back into its place, aligning it with the edge of the shelf. Order brings calm. Disorder invites questions. Sunlight has shifted while you were out. It now stretches farther across the floor, warming the boards near your feet. Dust motes drift lazily through the beam, slow and unbothered by economic systems. You watch them for a moment. If dust understood budgets, you suspect it would simply refuse to participate. You pull out a small notebook from the drawer. Its pages are filled with tidy columns, expenses, amounts, dates. The pencil rests snugly along the spine. You sit at the table and open to the current page. The paper is slightly rough beneath your fingertips. You add today's purchases in careful script. Each number lines up neatly, obedient as schoolchildren. Managing a household budget requires calculation, foresight, and restraint. It's accounting disguised as routine. You adjust figures, subtract totals, estimate future needs. Somewhere in the world, men in offices perform similar arithmetic and receive salaries for it. You perform yours beside a loaf of bread and a jar of preserves. The mathematics, however, is identical. The clock ticks from the hallway again. It sounds approving, like a metronome pleased with your steady tempo. You pause with the pencil hovering, considering the remaining coins. There's enough. For now. Relief moves through you quietly, like a breeze slipping under a door. Not dramatic, just present. Financial calm is rarely loud. It prefers to arrive softly, sit politely, and hope no one startles it away. You close the notebook and slide it back into the drawer. The wood glides with a gentle whisper. For a moment you rest your hands on the tabletop, palms flat, feeling the grain beneath your skin. This surface has held meals, letters, recipe books, and now numbers. It knows your life in textures. Outside, a distant voice calls someone's name. A carriage passes. The world hums along, unconcerned with columns of figures or the quiet satisfaction of a balanced page. You stand and return to the stove, checking the dough. It has risen beautifully, round and patient beneath its cloth. Transformation once again happening quietly. You smile faintly. Even without full control of the household money, you still create something daily that multiplies from almost nothing. Flour, water, time, skill. And perhaps that's the strangest arithmetic of all, how someone entrusted with so little currency can still produce so much value. The evening settles slowly, like honey poured across the floorboards. You move quietly through the house. The kind of quiet that feels deliberate and secretive, as though every creak might carry news to the wrong ears. By now, the household is winding down. The children, if there are any, have been tucked in, the newspapers are folded. The last clinking of cups signals a shift in atmosphere. The daylight has softened into a warm amber, shadows stretching across walls and floors, and the day's rigid structure begins to relax its grip. This is your time, your hidden time. Private rebellions of the night are subtle, small, yet profoundly yours. They don't involve scandal or law-breaking, they are gestures of autonomy, glimpses of freedom stitched into the domestic fabric. Perhaps you allow yourself to skip the ironing of a single shirt, just once to savour the rebellion. Perhaps you pull a book from the shelf that is technically forbidden, too fanciful, too frivolous, too outside the bounds of expected knowledge. You settle into a chair with a soft sigh, the corset loosened slightly at the laces, appreciating the gentle stretch after hours of constriction. Historians still argue how common these private acts of rebellion really were, since most diaries that mention them are deliberately vague. Some accounts hint at minor subversions, reading after lights out, experimenting with recipes outside approved instructions, or simply walking barefoot in the quiet of the kitchen. What's certain is that even small gestures offered psychological reprieve from the relentless structure imposed by society and household expectation. You pour yourself a cup of tea, steam curling in lazy spirals toward the ceiling. The kettle had hissed and simmered hours ago, yet the taste is comforting. Slightly sweetened with honey tucked into a corner of the cupboard, you cradle the cup with both hands, the warmth spreading slowly up your arms. Outside, a cat prowls near the fence. Its independence mirrors your own secret liberties, and you feel a kinship with it, a quiet acknowledgement of autonomy. In these moments, reflection becomes a companion. You recall the notes in the margins of recipe books, the unsent letters tucked carefully away. They all converge now in this intimate evening setting, forming a tapestry of thoughts, desires, and subtle defiance that exists beneath the surface of daily duties. Some women might have hummed quietly, practiced handwriting exercises, or sketched delicate flowers no one would ever see. Each act is an assertion of self, a gentle rebellion against the day's demands. The fire in the hearth glows faintly, casting golden light across the room, flickering shadows along the walls. You straighten a cushion that is already neat, adjust a throw, and perhaps, just for a second, you leave one detail slightly imperfect, a deliberate choice only you will notice. That imperfection is your signature, proof that control need not be absolute and that freedom can manifest in the smallest gestures. Evening chores now blend into rituals of observation. You might peek at letters, check a note in the ledger, or arrange the last items on the shelf. Everything appears orderly to outsiders, yet the internal world is rich with private choices, hidden freedoms, and small triumphs. These quiet rebellions, subtle though they are, sustain the spirit. They remind you that while the household is guided by rules, your mind and heart are spaces only you can navigate. One quirky detail preserved in personal diaries from the period suggests that some housewives would leave small tokens, like a flower, a folded note, or a tiny trinket, in places only they knew, signalling victories, memories, or secret joys. Scholars argue whether these were purely personal or intended as messages to future generations. You hold that ambiguity now in your chest, recognizing the thrill of a hidden act, no matter who might notice it. The clock ticks steadily, a soft companion to your evening freedom. Outside, shadows lengthen further, the air cooling, the world dimming. And you sit quietly, cradling your cup of tea, feeling the gentle power of choice, the simple pleasure of subtle defiance. The knowledge that in this private hour, your life is yours alone, even under the weight of expectation. The house settles into near silence, the kind that makes every small sound, creaking floorboard, distant cough, the ticking of the clock, feel magnified and intimate. You move slowly through the rooms, your bare feet brushing against the smooth wood. Each step is measured, deliberate, as though the house itself is guiding you through a choreography of habit and memory. Outside, the world is muted, the day has exhaled, leaving only shadows stretching across fences, streets and alleys. Inside, the home breathes quietly, carrying the faint smells of the day, bread baked, tea steeped, wax from polished furniture. You pause by the parlour window, peering out at the dimly lit street. Gas lamps flicker in the distance, illuminating faces in passing, glimpses of neighbours returning from errands or evening strolls. No one sees you, yet you feel a subtle connection, a thread of community that persists even when eyes are not directly upon you. Observation, you've learned, is often silent, continuous and rarely intrusive. It's woven into the rhythm of daily life. At the same time, you return your gaze inward. The kitchen, now cleared and tidied, holds traces of labour performed and forgotten in the mundane act of living, a stray spoon still warm from washing, a folded napkin, a dishcloth hung precisely. It's an archive, an unspoken record of care, of skill, of attention to detail that is quietly heroic in its consistency. That's the mainstream understanding of domestic work in the era, undervalued, repetitive, yet essential. You light a small candle on the mantel. Its flame flickers and dances, casting soft shadows that stretch and retract along the walls. You watch the movement hypnotically, letting it mingle with your thoughts. Small, consistent tasks performed over decades may seem trivial to outsiders, but the quiet mastery required to maintain a household is profound. You know it in your posture, your practiced movements, in the way you measure flour or fold letters or balance coins. Historians still debate the psychological impact of such constant expectation on women, whether it nurtured discipline, suppressed ambition, or fostered ingenious resilience. You feel all of these effects simultaneously: fatigue and pride, frustration and subtle triumph, the kind of mastery that exists only when someone must navigate limits imposed both by society and self. You step into your bedroom, the room dimly lit and fragrant with linens and a hint of lavender. Clothes for tomorrow are folded neatly on the chair, shoes lined in order, and a small mirror reflects the faint curve of your face, illuminated by candlelight. Here, away from the eyes and expectations of the household and the street, you finally exhale. You remove your corset, feeling ribs stretch in relief, muscles sighing, skin rediscovering its own space. The freedom is almost sensual in its simplicity. You sit at the small writing desk tucked in the corner. A notebook lies open, pencil resting at the ready. Perhaps tonight you will jot a few thoughts, record some fleeting impression, or doodle a delicate sketch no one will ever see. These private acts, small though they are, preserve individuality and creativity in a world that often demands conformity. You let your hands move freely, enjoying the quiet authority of choosing what, when, and how to create. Outside, the wind rustles faintly through trees, carrying distant voices and the subtle scent of evening rain. You close the notebook gently, setting the pencil aside. The house hums around you, alive with memories and the lingering traces of a day well kept. You feel a sense of accomplishment tempered by anticipation, the delicate knowledge that tomorrow will bring repetition, new duties and fresh opportunities to navigate expectation, observation and quiet ingenuity. And as you settle into bed, letting the sheets envelop you, you allow a rare thought to surface, that despite constraint, despite expectation, despite the constant gaze of society, you have cultivated a life layered with autonomy, subtle rebellion and personal triumphs invisible to the casual eye. This is the hidden life, the secret world of 1920s housewives, a life lived fully in the small details, the quiet margins, the moments of self preserved under layers of duty. The fire in the hearth flickers gently, casting long golden shadows that stretch lazily across the room. You sink deeper into the soft folds of your bed, feeling warmth spread from the blankets to your shoulders, down your arms, settling into your chest. Outside, night hums softly, the world quiet except for the distant whisper of leaves brushing against one another, the occasional sigh of a chimney releasing its last breath of smoke. The rhythm is slow, comforting, like a lullaby carried by wind and shadow. You watch the embers glow, little sparks drifting upward before fading into darkness. They remind you of the small triumphs of your day, the folded linens, the careful calculations, the quiet notes tucked away in notebooks and margins. Each one lingers, like these embers holding warmth, light and memory, even when the immediate glow has passed. Your mind allows itself to soften, to drift through those tiny victories with gentle curiosity, recalling moments that no one else may ever notice, but that you hold entirely for yourself. The scent of lavender, the faint residue of evening tea, the comforting structure of your room, all mingle to create a cocoon of safety and reflection. Thoughts float freely now, untethered from schedules, expectation, or the watchful eyes of the day. You trace the edges of memory like a slow hand over soft fabric, letting the warmth and quiet settle deep into your body. Outside, the world is still. Shadows stretch, curl, and dissolve as the night moves steadily onward. And inside you exhale completely, allowing the gentle hum of home, the fire's glow, and the quiet persistence of your own hidden life to lull you toward sleep. Good night.